Welcome to Western Serenade, a Western romance novel. Written by Leitha Watson. Narrated by Karen Thomas. Copyright 2023 by BrooksAudiobooks.com and Shadowplay Communications, LLC. All rights reserved. No portion of this book may be reproduced in any form without written permission from the publisher or author. Visit BrooksAudiobooks.com for updates on the availability of new books and a special free offer. Chapter 1. There were a total of 9 people in the group. This number included the manager, who both on and off the stage successfully portrayed the villain, a rather heavy-jawed, middle-aged man of foreign appearance, with a coarse, gruff voice. There were 3 women, a child of 8, whose exact origins was unknown, wrapped up like a mummy, and 4 males. Undoubtedly, the most noteworthy member of the troupe was the comedian's star, Mr. Slim Sprague, whose well-known name surely brings back fond memories of his acting career throughout the Western circuit. The long night's journey from their previous location, which involved 2 train changes, had been extremely tiring. The young woman with the stylish blue hat and the collar of her long gray coat turned up to partially hide her face was so exhausted that she declined to wait for a late breakfast. Instead, she insisted on being immediately directed to her room. There was a sturdy lock on the inside of the door, but due to sheer exhaustion of both body and mind, she forgot everything except her desperate need for rest. She dropped her belongings on the only visible chair and flung herself, fully dressed, onto the bed. Her cheek had barely touched the hard pillow before she fell into a deep sleep, resembling that of a weary child. Approximately an hour later, Carlton arrived from Steeple Point, shaking off the powdery snow from his long fur coat. His cheeks still tingling from the biting wind, he lazily scribbled his name on the lower line of the worn-out hotel registration book. "Can I have the same room, Mitch?" he casually inquired of the man sitting on the high stool behind the reception desk. The latter, preoccupied with some calculations, casually nodded, and the newest arrival promptly picked up his suitcase from the floor and began ascending the stairs, softly whistling. He was a tall, muscular young man with a clean-shaven face and a pair of dark gray eyes that looked straight ahead. He ran up the somewhat steep steps as if he enjoyed the exercise. Rounding the upper railing, he suddenly stopped in front of number 27, opened the door, took a single step inside, and came to an immediate halt. His casual whistling was suspended in breathless surprise. With that quick glance, the entire scene was permanently etched into his memory. The narrow, sparsely furnished room with rough plastered walls, the small, inexpensive mirror, the torn, half-green window curtain, the metal washstand, the wooden chair with the gray coat and blue hat on top, and the single-cot bed with its unconscious occupant. As he gazed, his first conscious emotion was sympathy. Everything seemed incredibly sad, homesick and desolate. Then his attention was captured by the partially upturned face, triggering a vague, dreamlike memory that he couldn't quite place. It reminded him of another face he had known, but he couldn't pinpoint it exactly. Gradually, that initial impression faded, and he saw her as a complete stranger, gradually revealing her few traces of feminine beauty. It was impossible to determine her age as she lay there, one hand beneath her cheek, her eyes closed, and her long, dark lashes clearly visible against her pale skin. Her chest rose and fell with the steady breaths of utter exhaustion. She appeared incredibly tired, disheartened, and unhappy, causing the young man to clench his teeth tightly as if he had personally been wronged. He noticed the thick darkness of her abundant hair, the flawless clarity of her complexion, the attractive shape of her slender, extended figure, the slim shoe with its high-arched instep peeking timidly beneath the blue skirt, the somewhat intriguing yet not particularly beautiful quality unconsciously revealed in the upturned face with its rounded chin and parted lips. Her features were not perfectly symmetrical, but they undeniably conveyed character. A kind of character that we vaguely recognize in a sculpted face, lacking the lifelike expression that only open eyes can provide. All of this crossed his mind in that moment of surprise-induced hesitation. However, Carlton was inherently a gentleman. Almost as soon as he comprehended the full significance of it all, he silently stepped backward and gently closed the door. For a brief moment of uncertainty, he stood there, blankly staring at the wooden surface, while the haunting memory once again taunted his futile attempts to associate this girl's face with someone he had known before. Finally, leaving his suitcase and overcoat lying in the hallway, he slowly retraced his steps down the stairs. "Mitch!" The young man leaned against the rough counter, his voice becoming more serious. "There happens to be a woman currently occupying the room you just assigned me." "No way. Really?" The clerk nonchalantly hopped down from his tall stool, pulling the register toward him. "She must be one of the performers, then. Let me check number 27, right? 27, oh yes, here it is. That's right." And his finger leisurely followed the line as he spelled out the name, Miss Alyssa Ornish. "Oh, now I remember her. She has black hair and a long gray coat. Definitely the best-looking one among them. The manager said she had to have a room all to herself, but I completely forgot that I assigned her to 27. Did it cause any trouble?" The other shook his head, bending down to read the name with his own eyes. There was nothing at all familiar about the sound of it, and he became vaguely aware of a sense of disappointment. Nonetheless, if she was on the stage, the name was likely assumed. The mere mention of it gave that impression. He walked over to the cigar stand and chose a cigarette, thinking deeply as he lit it with a match. Somehow he wasn't entirely pleased with this information. He would have preferred to discover that she was someone else. He glanced at the clerk through the faint haze of smoke, his growing curiosity finding hesitant expression. "What theater company is it?" he asked casually. "Heart of the World," Mitch replied with increased enthusiasm. "It's a fantastic play, and a really great company, they say. They've received some excellent reviews, and they have a whole load of scenery. They played in Denver for a whole month, and it costs $1.50 to get a decent seat even in this lousy town, so you can be sure it's not a bad show. 2/3 of the house is sold out in advance, but I know where I can get you some good seats for a little extra. Sprague is the star. You've heard of Sprague, haven't you? He's the funniest guy you've ever seen. He makes you laugh just by looking at him. And this Miss Ornish, she's the leading lady, and the traveling men say she's absolutely amazing. There's one of their show posters hanging over there behind the stove." Carlton strolled over to the indicated red and yellow poster and silently stood staring at it through the smoke from his cigarette. It depicted a thrilling stage scene, while beneath it, in type that was hardly less prominent than that used for the famous comedian Slim Sprague, was the announcement of the renowned dramatic actress, Miss Alyssa Ornish, along with several highly complimentary reviews from Western newspapers. The young man read these slowly, wondering why they should particularly interest him, and suddenly his rather serious face brightened into a smile, a whimsical thought flashing into his mind. "Oh, wow, why not?" he muttered, as if debating the matter with himself. "The report has gone east, and there's nothing more to be accomplished in Steeple Point for at least a month. This snow will have to melt away before they can hope to put any miners to work, and in the meantime, I might as well be gaining experiences on the road as wasting my money in wild living at Denver. It should be a great adventure, and I've always had the ambition to try something like this. Well, here's my opportunity. And besides, I can't help believing that that girl might be interesting. Her face is, anyway." He walked back to where Mitch still hung lazily over the cigar case. "Who is running this show outfit?" "That big guy writing at the table. His name's Clinton," suspiciously. "But listen, I'm telling you, there's no use asking him for freebies. He's very stingy." "Freebies? Oh, you have little faith," exclaimed Carlton cheerfully. "I'm not after freebies, Mitchme. I'm looking for a job." Clinton looked up from his writing, scowling somewhat under his heavily bushy eyebrows and revealing a rough face with small gleaming eyes filled with cunning. At that first glance, Carlton instinctively disliked the guy, yet he explained his situation in a few short sentences, and as the other listened, the managerial frown slightly eased. "Actor?" he asked briefly when the younger man paused, his gaze appreciatively wandering over the strong, upright figure. "Well, not exactly that, at least just in an amateur way," and the applicant laughed lightly. You see, I thought you might possibly find some use for me in some small role until I learn more about the business. I don't really care about the pay, but I want to experience the lifestyle." "Exactly, my friend." And the worthy Clinton became almost briskly friendly in manner. Perhaps here was an angel waiting to be discovered in the name of art. At least he appeared well-dressed, looked intellectually promising, and expressed himself as completely indifferent about salary. Such visitors were indeed rare, and the astute manager understood his business enough to let his serious features relax into a warm, welcoming smile. "Exactly, young man. Have a seat, and I will see just what is best for both of us. You would be an actor. You have the ambition. Ah, I see it in your eyes, and it gives me great pleasure. But, young man, it is unfortunate that I don't have much to offer you at the moment, yet opportunities will arise if you stay with me. Yes, I, Samuel Clinton, will make you a great actor. I can see that in your face, and for that reason, I will now give you the chance. You will start as an understudy, but not for long. All I want now is a utility man, someone to take small parts, understudy, and be ready to help out with the scenery and the props. I couldn't pay much for that." And he spread his ringed hands apologetically. "But it's only the first step on the ladder of fame. Every day I will teach you the great art of the actor. Will you come with me in that way, my friend?" "Certainly, that will be perfectly satisfactory." "Ah," delightedly, "you are a good boy, willing to learn, I see. Next season, who knows? You might be the leading man if you work hard. I'm going to pay you now after 1 week's trial, when I know better what you are worth, hey?" Carlton casually nodded his acceptance of these rather vague terms, his hands in his pockets, his gray eyes smiling their appreciation of the situation. Clinton was deliberately examining him, as he might a horse he had just bought. "You are quite slim to look at," he admitted finally, thoughtfully. "Are you pretty strong?" The younger man silently extended his right arm for the other to inspect, who felt the firmness of muscle under the fabric with evident respect. "Oh, my God," the manager muttered in undisguised surprise. "It is wonderful, and you such a slender young man to look at. I was most afraid you could not do my work, but it is all right. You will eat with us at the long table," he gestured vaguely toward the dining room, "at 12:30. And then I will walk with you over to the Opera House and show you what needs to be done with that scenery and those trunks. My God, it is amazing the muscles that you have. You would make a great Davy Crockett when I teach you the business, my friend." The manager's admiration of his new acquisition was so clearly evident that Carlton felt compelled to acknowledge it. "I am pleased you seem so satisfied," he said, standing up. "Satisfied? My God." And the ecstatic Clinton warmly shook the hand of his new recruit. "It is a great stroke of luck for me, my friend. That Miss Ornish, she earns me a lot of money while I show her how to be an actress. Oh, it is just beautiful to see her act. And now you come with me as well, and care nothing for what I pay you, and I can see you have the talent of an actor." "Oh, my God. It was too good to be true," Carlton exclaimed. He happily walked away and headed back to the cigar stand where Mitchme stood there completely confused. "So, did you get it?" Mitchme asked with a grin. "Mitchell," Carlton replied with a hint of superiority. "You can give me another cigar, and I kindly ask you to refrain from being too familiar in the future. I am now a versatile employee for the Heart of the World Company, and therefore deserve more respect." Chapter 2. Miss Ornish didn't show up for lunch, although Carlton met the other members of the company. He found them friendly enough, even somewhat lively, with the only exception being Mr. Sprague, who maintained a dignified and rather gloomy silence, fitting for someone of his recognized professional standing, after giving the newcomer a long, impertinent stare that seemed to express disapproval. The manager was outwardly in a great mood, telling several stories that everyone, except the reserved comedian, laughed heartily at. After the meal, Clinton graciously bought his new recruit a cigar, and then walked alongside him towards the Opera House, where the necessary instructions for new duties promptly began. If Carlton had previously thought that his first steps towards theatrical honors would be easy, he was quickly proven wrong under the enthusiastic manager's guidance. It turned out to be a demanding afternoon, but the young man had the determination to succeed, that stubborn pride that never surrenders to difficulties. He clenched his teeth, rolled up his sleeves, and earnestly got to work. It was a small, poorly constructed theater with limited stage space, while a chaotic mix of trunks and pieces of canvas scenery cluttered the wings. At first glance, it seemed like a jumble of random objects, impossible to bring into any semblance of order. But Clinton recognized each individual piece of luggage, every separate section of canvas, remembering exactly where it belonged during the upcoming performance. For over an hour, he pranced around the filthy stage, shouting precise instructions and emphasizing them with forceful curses. While Carlton, with the help of 2 local assistants, carried trunks into the various dressing rooms, hung curtains in designated spots, placed set pieces within easy reach, and arranged the necessary props where they couldn't be overlooked during the rush of the evening's performance. Gradually, order emerged from chaos, and the astute manager chuckled with delight at how quickly the newly hired utility man grasped the situation and mastered the confusing details. Without a doubt, he had found a true gem in this fresh recruit. After attending to the most important matters, Clinton gave some final instructions and left for the hotel, feeling confident that this young man would carry out his orders perfectly. And Carlton did. He possessed the determination to thoroughly complete any task he undertook, and although he had initially taken on the position of utility man in the Heart of the World company on a whim, he was already starting to feel a slight interest in the success of the upcoming show and a faint sense of camaraderie, which motivated him to give his best effort. In fact, his temporary dedication to preparing the stage was strong enough to temporarily overshadow any recollection of the young lady he had discovered asleep in room 27, the very reason that had prompted him to take this step. The memory of her hardly crossed his mind throughout the afternoon, but it came rushing back in full force when, in the midst of his strenuous work, he lifted a small leather trunk and saw her name clearly painted on the end. The marking of chalk indicating its rightful place now displayed dressing room number 2. Instead of carelessly rolling it as he had done with countless others, the new utility man carefully lifted it onto his shoulder and gently placed it against the opposite wall. He glanced around the cramped space that Miss Alyssa Ornish had been assigned, filled with curiosity. It seemed like a tiny, poorly ventilated hole with rough wooden walls and ceiling. Clearly it was meant to be illuminated at night by a single gaslight enclosed within a wire mesh. Inside there was only a simple chair, similar to those found in kitchens, and a small mirror that had a crack in one corner and was covered in fly specks. Rusty hooks adorned the side walls and the back of the door, intended for hanging discarded clothing. The room was depressingly empty, and worst of all, disgustingly dirty, with thick layers of dust covering everything, and a floor that appeared to have not been swept in weeks. Expressing his disgust, Carlton searched for a broom and a dusting cloth and proceeded to give the gloomy room a thorough cleaning, perhaps the first since the building's construction. After completing this arduous task, he critically surveyed the scene, his face glistening with honest sweat, and cast a curious glance at the neighboring dressing rooms. They were equally filthy and unsuitable for use, yet he felt no obligation to clean them as well. By 4 o'clock, everything was in its proper place, the stage was perfectly set for the opening act, and Carlton returned to the hotel to deliver his report to the enthusiastic Clinton. During supper, Miss Ornish joined the company, seated between the manager and Mr. Slim Sprague, although Carlton quickly noticed that she paid little attention to either of them unless directly addressed. She greeted the others present with the necessary warmth and camaraderie, but there was a certain reserved quality in her demeanor that immediately quieted the previously lively conversation at what Clinton liked to call the training table. Once the voices resumed, however, the choice of topics noticeably improved. Without uttering a word or even a glance, the actress's silent influence brought refinement to the table, elevating the bohemian atmosphere. Carlton quickly realized this and began observing the lady with growing curiosity, which soon turned into a deeper interest. Her unique personality continuously captivated his imagination, even as a faint, tantalizing memory eluded him. He was certain that he had never encountered this young woman before, yet she somehow reminded him of the past. Her eyes, the distinct shape of her face, the peculiar way she tossed back her dark, shiny hair, and above all the quick smile that appeared when she found something amusing, creating an enchanting dimple in her cheek. All of these elements puzzled and intrigued him. And as he admired her undeniable femininity, his initial vague curiosity about her as an actress transformed into something more. She was unlike anything he had imagined, devoid of the glitz and glamour of the stage. Until now he hadn't fully recognized her beauty, but as her dark eyes sparkled with intelligence, her face became undeniably attractive, exuding a unique charm and femininity. Additionally, her impeccable taste in fashion, which Carlton, as a man, appreciated, only added to her appeal. Much of this, it is true, he figured out later and slowly, for during that first meal only two things impressed him clearly: the depth of emotion shining in those wonderfully revealing eyes, and her complete disregard of his presence. If she noticed any addition to their group, there was no sign at all. Their eyes accidentally met once, but hers seemed to see nothing, and Carlton went back to his unpleasant work at the opera house, feeling somewhat disappointed. Hidden in the dark shadows of the wings, he stood mesmerized that night, watching her portray the role of a wife whose previously happy life had been destroyed by deceit. The power and unique originality of her portrayal, along with its remarkable clarity and intense realism, held him captivated. The play's plot was unpleasant, melodramatic, and completely unrealistic, instantly repulsing Carlton's refined taste. However, this woman interpreted her own part with the rare instinct of a true artist, bringing to life the specific character entrusted to her and captivating the audience with a breathtaking display of true artistic talent. Her voice, manner, actions, and even the smallest details of her face and figure made her truly the woman she portrayed. It was an art so exquisite that it made the audience forget the artist, and even themselves. Her flawless craftsmanship, precise, well-rounded, and complete, stood out like an intricate cameo next to the crude buffoonery of Slim Sprague, the coarse wickedness of Clinton, and the stiff mannerisms of the rest of the cast. They were amateurs compared to a figure brimming with life and intelligence. She seemed to redeem the ordinary material of the vulgar, unnatural story and give it a vital reason for existing. The laughs that greeted the comedian's cheap jokes turned into a sudden silence of anticipation when she entered the stage, and every word or action of hers commanded attention. It was a triumph beyond applause, beyond any mere outward show of approval. Carlton felt the enchantment deeply, his entire body exhilarated by her incredible portrayal of this ordinary thing, her elevation of it from the unpleasant chaos of its surroundings and infusing it with the vibrant life of her own interpretation. Never once did he question the genuine but untrained brilliance behind those radiant eyes, that expressive face, those sincere, calm tones which so touched and influenced the heart. In the past, he had witnessed the stage at its finest, and now he recognized in this woman that subtle power which must conquer all obstacles and eventually succeed. Early the next morning, tossing restlessly on a hard cot bed in the next town on their schedule, he found himself completely unable to separate this memory from his thoughts. She even appeared in his dreams, a curvaceous, youthful figure, her young face glowing with the dominant emotions within her, her dark eyes serious with contemplation, and he awoke finally facing another day of menial labor, actually rejoicing in the knowledge that he was part of the heart of the world. What he had initially taken on as a mere playful whim, a mere act of youthful adventure, had suddenly transformed into a genuine urge to which his heart fully surrendered. In all outward appearances, Miss Alyssa Ornish remained blissfully unaware of both his admiration and his presence. It was impossible to imagine that in such a small company he could constantly pass by without attracting notice, yet there was no exchange of words or glances between them. No introduction had taken place, and she simply disregarded him, under the natural assumption, without a doubt, that he was merely an ignorant stagehand, a handler of trunks, a manipulator of scenery, in whom she could find no possible interest. A week passed in this manner, with the troupe showcasing their talents to good business and constantly venturing into more distant areas. They would stop at all sorts of hotels, travel in various modes of transportation, and showcase their skills, or lack thereof, on makeshift stages. Sometimes it would be a simple hall, while other times it would be an armory, with the occasional opera house providing them with a much-needed boost. Small cities, scattered towns, and lively mining camps warmly welcomed and hurried them along until everything became monotonous and names lost their meaning. It was the kind of life that truly tested one's character, and the traveling heart-of-the-world troupe quickly began to reveal their true selves. Clinton, who was making money, managed to maintain his rough amiability despite the hardships of travel. However, the majority of the actors grew sullen and irritable. The renowned comedian became glum and unapproachable, resembling a bear. The leading man swore angrily over any little inconvenience and behaved like a boor. The young female lead was snappy and had a feline quality about her. Miss Ornish, on the other hand, remained reserved, quiet, and never complained. She formed no close friendships but continued to deliver her nightly performances with increasing power. Carlton, who had been observing her with growing interest, believed that the strain of this lifestyle was taking a toll on her health. He noticed the pallor of her cheeks, the dark circles under her eyes, and a slight decrease in her usual liveliness. However, he didn't have many opportunities to interact with her as he was occupied with his own demanding work. The constant traveling from one town to another left little time for rest or contemplation. Although he had been promoted to a minor speaking role, the rest of his waking hours, when he was dressed in work clothes, were dedicated to strenuous physical labor. The excitement of the life had long disappeared. The eagerly anticipated experience had already become more than enough. Time and time again, throwing his tired body onto a bed in some unfamiliar room, he had called himself a complete idiot and loudly swore that he would definitely quit in the morning. Yet the girl held on to him. He didn't fully understand how or why, but some strange, undefined fascination seemed to connect his fate to hers. He always wanted to see her again, to be close to her, to admire her work, to hear her voice, to feel the electricity of her presence. This influence over him became so strong and compelling that day after day he held on, actually afraid to sever that small bond of professional companionship. This was definitely not her fault. It was in Shelbyville that she first spoke to him, first gave him the earliest indication that she even recognized his presence in the company. The theater that specific night was packed, and she, finishing a piece of work that left her cheeks flushed, her slender body trembling with intense emotion, while the prolonged applause roared after her from the front, quickly stepped into the dark shadows of the wings, and thus came face to face with Carlton. His eyes were shining with undisguised admiration for her talent. Perhaps the sudden change had rattled her nerves, because she spoke with feverish haste upon seeing his rolled-up sleeves and coarse woolen shirt. "Why is it that you always happen to be right in my way whenever I leave the stage?" she impetuously questioned. "Is there no other place where you can wait to do your work instead of blocking my exit?" For a brief moment, the surprised man stood hesitating, hat in hand. "I truly apologize for unintentionally offending you, Miss Ornish," he finally explained slowly. "Yet surely this occasion should bring you joy instead of annoyance." "Absolutely. Why is that?" "Because I really enjoy your work. I stood here just so I could observe the details more closely." She looked directly at him with sudden interest. "You enjoy my work?" she exclaimed, smiling slightly. "How incredibly amusing. But undoubtedly you do, just like those others out there who have no idea what it all means. Perhaps you're equally interested in the artistic talent of Mr. Slim Sprague." Carlton let his cool gray eyes brighten, and his lips relax slightly. "Sprague is nothing more than a clown," he replied calmly. "You are an artist. There is no comparison, Miss Ornish. The play itself is completely unworthy of your talent, yet you manage to dignify it in a way that I will always admire." She stood staring at him, her lips slightly parted, seemingly so startled by these unexpected words that she couldn't speak. "Why?" she finally managed to say, her cheeks turning red. "I thought you were like the others we've had here, just a common stagehand. You speak with refinement and purpose. Haven't you lived in the West long enough to discover that educated men can sometimes be found in rough clothing?" "Oh, yes," she said doubtfully, still looking at his face. "Miners, ranchers, engineers, but hardly in your current line of work." Miss Ornish, Carlton straightened up. Perhaps I work here for a reason similar to why you travel with a troupe of performers. She shrugged her shoulders, her lips smiling, the alluring dimple showing in her cheeks. And what reason is that? The ambition of an amateur to establish a place in the professional theater. Who told you that? Mr. Samuel Clinton made that suggestion. It was very kind of him to discuss my motives so openly with a stranger, but he only told you a small part of the truth. In my case, it was more of a necessary requirement for an amateur to support herself, a deliberate choice between pursuing a career in the performing arts or facing extreme hunger. Without ambition? She hesitated slightly, yet there was a sense of profound admiration lurking within those gray eyes, staring directly into her darker ones, accompanied by a resolute determination she could feel. Initially, I must confess, not much, she admitted, as if acknowledging it to herself alone. But I must admit that it has grown on me over time, to the point where I am determined to succeed. His eyes lit up, unabashed admiration evident in them, his lips speaking impulsively. And what's more, Miss Ornish, you will achieve it. Do you truly believe that? She had already forgotten that the man standing before her was merely a stagehand, and her cheeks flushed with eagerness in response to the unquestionable sincerity of his words. No one else has ever expressed such sentiments to me. Only the audiences have seemed to care and appreciate. Clinton and all the others have hardly offered me a word of encouragement. Clinton and the others are fools, Carlton exclaimed with sudden indignation. They believe they are actors because they prance and shout on stage, and they mock anyone who is not in their league. But let me tell you this, Miss Ornish. The manager considers you a treasure. He told me as much. She stood before him, the stage lights reflecting off her hair, her hands clasped, her dark eyes eagerly scanning his face as if these unexpected words of appreciation had given her renewed confidence, like a sip of wine. Really, is that true? Oh, I am so pleased. I thought perhaps they were only mocking me from the audience, even though I have always strived to do my very best. You have given me a newfound hope that I can truly excel in this craft. Was that my cue? She stepped back quickly, listening to the voices droning on the stage, but there was still a moment of freedom, and she glanced uncertainly at Carlton. Do I have to thank you for giving me such amazing dressing rooms lately? She asked with a hint of playfulness. I definitely did some cleaning. It was considerate of you. And her clear voice hesitated for a moment. Was it also you who put those flowers on my trunk last night? He nodded, feeling slightly embarrassed by the sudden return of restraint in her demeanor. They were incredibly beautiful. Where did you get them? From Denver. They were sent by express, and I'm more than happy if they brought you joy. Miracle of miracles. A stagehand ordering roses from Denver. It must have cost you a week's salary. He smiled. And unfortunately, I haven't even been paid yet. Her eyes looked up at his face, but quickly fell, shadowed by her long lashes. Thank you very much, she said, her voice trembling. But please don't do it again. I'd rather not have you. Before he could come up with a satisfactory response to such an unexpected prohibition, she stepped onto the stage. This brief conversation didn't yield the results Carlton confidently anticipated. Miss Ornish clearly didn't consider casual conversation as a basis for future friendship. And although she greeted him when they met again, acknowledging him like the others in the troupe, there was a quiet reserve in her manner that effectively prevented any possibility of familiarity. In fact, Carlton didn't even consider that she saw him as any different from the rest until one evening in Bluffton, when he happened to be resting behind a piece of set scenery and overheard the manager stopping the young lady on her way to her dressing room. Miss Ornish, Clinton said, rubbing his hands and smiling warmly. At Gilchrist we are scheduled to perform for 2 nights, and the second performance will be The Man from the West. You know that play, Ida Summers? Yes, she replied. I am very familiar with the lines, but who will be playing Ralph Wilde? Mr. Stork, of course. Do you think I hire actors every time we change the play? She looked up at his blotchy face with her dark, expressive eyes, gathering her skirts in one hand. As you wish, she said calmly. But I will not play Ida Summers opposite Mr. Stork's Ralph Wilde. I told you this clearly before we left Denver, and that's why we switched to the heart of the world. The more I've gotten to know Mr. Stork since we started traveling, the less inclined I am to give in on this matter." Clinton laughed rudely, his face turning red. "Oh, come on," he exclaimed, mockingly dismissive. "When you become a star, then you can throw tantrums, but not now, not with me. You'll play what I say, or I'll find someone else. Don't get too cocky, or you'll lose your job real fast. You don't want Stork to flirt with you? You don't want him to kiss you? What's the problem?" "Yes, that's exactly it. Oh, you're too picky for a professional. You want to choose your lover, huh? Forget that you're making a living. What do you have against Stork?" Miss Ornish, her cheeks burning with indignation, her eyes already fiery, didn't hold back. "Nothing personally, as long as he stays away from me," she replied firmly. "He is crude, vulgar, and uncouth, and I have far too much self-respect to allow such a man to touch me, whether on stage or off. It would be an unbearable insult for him to kiss me." Clinton, completely unable to understand the girl's emotions, shifted uncomfortably under the sharp sting of her words, but continued to smile foolishly. "Dot is very nice, quite melodramatic, but it is not professional, miss," he stammered, trying to come up with a satisfactory argument. "Why, Stork was not so bad. Miss Lyle acted that part with him all last season without complaining. Damn it, do you want an angel? You don't have to act that part with me or Mr. Sprague either, do you, hey?" Miss Ornish turned away from him contemptuously, her face determined and pale. "If you really want to know, there is only one man in your troupe that I would agree to play it with," she stated calmly. "And that is?" "I don't even know his name," she replied, turning her head just enough to look directly at Clinton's surprised face. "But I'm referring to your new utility man. At least he possesses some of the basic qualities of a gentleman." The door of her dressing room opened and closed, leaving the shocked manager standing alone outside, gasping for breath, his thick lips uttering powerless curses, while Carlton discreetly moved further back amidst the complexity of the scenery. Chapter 3. The group, while on their journey, reached Timmins Junction on a Saturday afternoon. Carlton, pausing for a moment in the hotel reception, overheard Miss Ornish inquire if they were likely to stay there on Sunday. Later, she asked the hotel clerk about any Episcopalian services in the town. Their arrival being somewhat delayed, Carlton was occupied with stage preparations for the evening's show, and he only remembered this conversation after he had finished his work for the night. Then, in the quiet of his room, he decided to make an immediate change in his situation, or else give up the experiment altogether. He had been tired of it for a long time, but there was a strange, almost inexplicable attraction to this young woman that kept him bound to unpleasant servitude. The next morning he came downstairs with his plans firmly set. He was dressed in a smart business suit that he had stored away since his first impulsive foray into the world of theater, and in this outfit he felt more like his old self than he had in any moment since he surrendered to Clinton's control. With the mere act of putting on clean clothes and somewhat fashionable attire, a certain level of self-confidence, boldness, and hope returned to him, and in the blink of an eye, Carlton the utility became Carlton the gentleman. The rest of the troupe slept in, leaving him to have breakfast alone after fruitlessly lingering around the office, hoping that Miss Ornish might appear and keep him company. It was almost embarrassing to see that young woman enter the empty dining room soon after he had returned to the solitary office, but she showed no sign of recognition as she passed by, and his renewed boldness was not enough to allow him to intrude on her privacy. He could only linger at the desk for a moment, trying to get a better view of her through the partially open door. Gripping a freshly lit cigar nervously, Carlton finally walked out onto the spacious porch to patiently wait for the opportunity he felt was quickly approaching. It was a sunny spring morning, warm enough to be comfortable in the sun, although the mountains looming over the town were still covered in snow. The long, meandering main street of the town seemed quite deserted, with most of the shops closed. The stark contrast between its current rather dull emptiness and the wild partying of the previous night seemed truly painful, while the solemn prevailing silence served to weaken Carlton's bold resolutions and made him feel strangely timid. He leisurely walked a block or more, peering into the store windows, but never venturing far from the hotel steps. Then he casually strolled back again. Sprague and Stork were now positioned on the porch, reclining in their chairs, their feet resting on the convenient railing, smoking and loudly conversing with a group of traveling men. Carlton, to his disgust, overheard snippets of their vulgar stories, constantly met with bursts of laughter, but kept his distance, leaning idly against the rail. Far down the street, from an unseen church steeple, a bell rang solemnly. Listening, he wondered if she would come alone, and feared that his heart might not race. Clinton, looking somewhat like a plump pig recently shaved, sauntered out of the open office door and casually looked around. He exchanged a few polite words with his rather quiet assistant, inspecting his well-tailored clothes with some apparent concern, before eventually drifting over to join the more friendly group nearby. Carlton remained in his chosen spot, his vigilant eyes never straying for long from the entrance for ladies, a few steps to his left. Suddenly that slightly used door opened, and excitement surged through his veins as Miss Ornish stepped out unaccompanied. She appeared well-dressed, looking delicate in her blue skirt and jacket, her dark hair adorned with the stylish blue hat, holding a prayer book in one neatly gloved hand. As she unconsciously turned towards the steps, Carlton tipped his hat and nodded. With a quick, surprised glance, the girl recognized him, a sudden blush coloring her cheeks, her eyes quickly averting from his own. In that sudden revelation, the young man seemed completely different to her compared to her previous perception of him. The marvel of stylish clothing and surroundings had instantly brought them to a level of companionship. Carlton also felt a similar surge of excitement, although his quiet voice shook momentarily. "I hope you will forgive my boldness," he said, taking the one necessary step to face her. "But I admit to intentionally waiting here to ask for the honor of walking to the church by your side." "By my side? Absolutely," she replied, her lips and eyes smiling openly at him. "And how did you happen to guess that I intended to go? Is it a common trait among leading ladies?" "I cannot say for certain, as I have limited acquaintance with them," he replied, gaining more confidence from her warm demeanor. "But I happened to overhear you questioning the clerk last night, and the audacious idea immediately captivated me. May I have such privilege?" Her dark eyes briefly shifted from scrutinizing his eager face to the group of interested smokers nearby. Whatever she may have observed there was quickly mirrored in her pursed lips and swift decision. "I would be delighted to have your company," she responded, meeting his gaze openly. "But any further delay might make us late, and I detest that." As they descended the steps to the street, Carlton caught a glimpse of the others. They were all watching them intently, with Stork even rising to his feet and taking a step forward, his cigar still in his mouth. Then the group behind burst into loud laughter, and the younger man clenched his teeth, his cheeks flushed with sudden anger. He would have enjoyed rushing back up the stairs and teaching those grinning fools a much-needed lesson. But he glanced over at his companion, her eyes looking down, seemingly completely unaware of it all, and composed himself, walking alongside her, upright and silent. They walked the entire empty block without talking, each preoccupied with the intricacies of the boardwalk. Then Carlton tried to break the somewhat awkward silence, his first words sounding strangely clumsy and restrained. "It was really kind of you to allow such a privilege when we have barely spoken to each other before." She looked at his serious face, a certain flirtatious smile making her suddenly seem youthful. "Perhaps if you knew the exact reason for my complete surrender, you might not feel so flattered," she confessed shyly. "Really? You mean why you agreed so easily? Then maybe you should tell me right away, because I must admit I already feel quite conceited about my good fortune." She raised her eyes questioningly, and for the first time he looked directly into their unveiled depths. "Then I must confess. What if I were to say that I simply chose the lesser of two evils, in short, preferred your company to something I considered much worse?" "You mean Stork?" She nodded, her dark eyes once again shadowed, her cheeks slightly reddening under his unwavering gaze. "Well, I can't say I feel very flattered to be the subject of such a choice," Carlton admitted honestly, The very idea makes me uneasy, fearing that my presence may now be unwelcome since Stork has been safely left behind. Yet it also gives me courage, and I dare to ask Miss Ornish what she would probably have answered if Stork had been left out of the equation entirely. His soft voice held a tone of subdued sincerity, and the woman's face quickly lost its smile. An instant she hesitated, her eyes lowered, fully aware that he was anxiously searching her face for the absolute truth. "And under those circumstances," she finally replied, "Miss Ornish would most likely have said yes, although it would have been more deliberately spoken, so that you would have understood the extent of her condescension." Carlton chuckled. "You cannot possibly comprehend the immense relief I felt upon hearing that last admission," he explained cheerfully. "Now I can proceed with a clear conscience, and I will undoubtedly find within the church service an expression of my own deep gratitude." It was a very lively exchange of words that followed, with each cautiously trying to gain a clearer understanding of the other, yet both quickly realizing that their connection was not meant to be ordinary. To Miss Ornish, as she observed her companion with shy intensity, this upright, masculine young man with a tanned, clean-shaven face and sincere gray eyes seemed to possess a strength of character that she instinctively recognized and surrendered to. He possessed the qualities that a woman like her immediately identifies: physical strength and courage, combined with mental sharpness and unwavering determination. The fact that he was currently in an unworthy occupation added an air of mystery to his persona, as it was clearly impossible to believe that this was all he had achieved in life. And Carlton also marveled at her, his earlier admiration for her lively charm and demeanor expanding as he realized her mind quickly responded to his guidance. She was definitely not an ordinary stage girl, but rather an educated, refined, and ambitious woman, mature beyond her years due to her experiences. Their conversation touched on ideals, art, literature, and secret aspirations, topics not often discussed during early acquaintanceships, breaking through the mental emptiness that had characterized their lives for weeks. This shared ground of thoughts and interests immediately sparked a sense of friendship and openness between them, which was truly inspiring. Almost without fully understanding how it happened, they were conversing as if the significant years had already solidified their friendship. With flushed cheeks and eyes filled with excitement, Miss Ornish became even more beautiful, and Carlton observed her with an admiration that was openly displayed in his eyes. They were looking for a small chapel at the very end of the scattered street, and there were only a few worshippers present. After the ceremony and the sermon, the two of them walked out together in silence, their previous brief closeness now just a memory. Neither of them knew exactly how to resume a conversation that had been interrupted by such a solemn service. Miss Ornish was the first to break the tension. "You obviously know the complexities of the prayer book," she said calmly. "So I venture to ask if you are a churchgoer." "Not exactly, although my parents are both church members and I was raised attending services." "You know, I'm glad to hear that. It's a small additional connection between us to share an interest in the same church, isn't it? I couldn't help but think during the service how strange it was for us to talk so openly this morning when we know nothing about each other. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions about yourself?" He looked at her with surprise, forgetting for a moment that they were still relatively unfamiliar with each other. It felt as if he had known her for years. "Of course, go ahead and ask. I never intended to hide anything." She smiled at his confused words, but she herself was not entirely without embarrassment. "It does seem almost ridiculous, but I don't even know your name." "It's Ned Carlton. Not a bad name, is it? Do you mind telling me where your home is?" "I can hardly claim such a place, but my people live in Denver." She took a quick, surprised breath, her eyes immediately dropping as if to hide some partially revealed secret. For a moment her parted lips trembled with a question she hesitated to ask. "I believe I've heard of a Colonel Daniel Carlton in Denver. A banker," she finally said. "I've seen his house. He is my father." Her lashes, which had been casting a shadow, suddenly lifted, and color once again rushed to her clear cheeks. "You're certainly becoming quite mysterious," she exclaimed, trying to sound light-hearted. "The son of Colonel Carlton working for a group of traveling actors. I can hardly believe it's true." Carlton laughed. "It does seem a bit out of proportion," he admitted, "and I can't expect to fully explain the situation. However, I'm not as unworthy of my heritage as it may seem. I'll trust you with part of the story, at least, Miss Ornish. I'm a mining engineer by profession and was sent out about a month ago by a group of Denver investors to thoroughly examine some promising claims at Shell Rock. I finished the examination, sent my report, and then, on the same day your troop arrived there, I found myself in Rockton with nothing to do and several weeks of free time. I had planned to return to Denver, but a sudden temptation came over me to try out a week or two in the world of theater. I had always had a childish desire in that direction and a natural inclination for new experiences. Clinton was impressed with my application, so I easily secured my current esteemed position on the stage. And is that all? Not entirely. There's still a chapter to be added to my confessions. I acknowledge I would have grown weary of life and its challenges long ago if it weren't for you being a part of the same troupe. Me, Mr. Carlton? Well, we've barely spoken to each other until today. True, but I strongly deny that it was my fault. In fact, I had firmly decided that we should, and being a spoiled child, I'm accustomed to getting my own way. This maybe explains my persistence and why I'm still with the heart of the world. But putting all that aside, I became deeply interested in your work, Miss Ornish, immediately recognizing that it takes great talent to bring dignity to such a mediocre play. I started studying you and your interpretation. I never grew tired of observing those little unique touches with which you consistently enhanced your lines and actions, and how clearly your understanding of the character shone against the unrefined backdrop of those performers around you. It was a lesson in the art of interpretation for me, and one that I never grew tired of. Then I must also confess, something else happened. He paused, looking at her sideways, and as if she felt the power of that gaze, she turned her own face, brightened by his sincere words of praise, their eyes meeting openly. What? The most natural thing in the world. My admiration for your artistry only served to deepen my early interest in you as a person, he said seriously. Her eyes remained steady, bravely facing him, although her cheeks reddened, and her lips faltered in their initial bold attempt to respond swiftly. I'm so glad you genuinely believe that about my work. So glad you told me. It's a wonderful source of encouragement because now I know that you speak as an educated and cultured man. You must have witnessed the utmost level of stage interpretation, and I'm confident that you don't simply intend to flatter me. Your words don't sound like an insincere compliment. Oh, you can hardly imagine how much success means to me, Mr. Carlton. Her voice growing deeper as her earnestness increased, her eyes becoming more thoughtful. But I am going to share a part of my life story with you so that you can somewhat understand. This is my first professional commitment. However, I wasn't a girl obsessed with the stage when I first applied for the job. On the contrary, the idea was extremely repulsive to me. My earlier life was spent in circumstances that kept me completely distant from anything of that nature. While I always enjoyed portraying characters as a form of relaxation and even gained a rather impressive reputation as an amateur while attending school in the East, I still had a strong bias against the professional stage, despite my intense admiration for its more accomplished performers. Turning to it for a means of living was a harsh necessity, and my first week on the road was a constant nightmare. I detested the play, the act of making myself a nightly spectacle, the rudeness and lack of manners from the audiences, the coarse, ordinary people with whom I was constantly forced to associate. You know them, so you can somewhat understand what daily interaction with them must inevitably mean to someone like me, who was raised in a more refined social environment. However, my position in the troupe granted me certain opportunities for solitude, and my circumstances compelled me to persist. As a result, the dormant artistic spirit within me seemed to come alive. Ambition began to replace indifference. I grew increasingly disgusted with mediocrity and embarked on a determined pursuit of higher accomplishments. I had little guidance other than my own natural instincts, yet I persisted. I insisted on living my own life when I wasn't on stage, and to distract myself from unhappy thoughts, I devoted all my spare moments to diligent study. Almost to my surprise, the very effort brought me happiness. I began to forget the past and its flaws, to erase the present with its boring, unpleasant realities, and to live for the future. My ideals, initially just vague dreams, took shape and substance. I decided to succeed, to master my craft, to develop whatever talent I may have to its highest potential, to become an actress deserving of the name. This developing ideal has already transformed me into a new person. It has given me something to live for, to strive towards. She came to an abrupt pause, noticing in the honest gray eyes scanning her lively face a look that caused her own to drop. Then her lips formed a stronger determination, and she continued as if completely indifferent to his presence. You may not understand all of this, but I do. It was the turning point in my life, and I started right where I was. I tried to make the most out of that miserable, melodramatic role that had been assigned to me. I chose to portray it calmly, with an intensity that could be felt but not heard, the complete opposite of the interpretation given by Miss Lyle last season, and I felt confident that my efforts were appreciated by the audiences. It encouraged me to see their responsiveness. However, Clinton, Sprague, and Stork simply laughed and exchanged knowing looks, which hurt me deeply, even though I had little respect for their criticisms. Still, they were experienced professional actors, and I wasn't entirely sure if my judgment could be wrong. Miss Head, the young and kind-hearted ingenue, praised my efforts warmly, but aside from that, your evident appreciation is my only true reward. I spoke to you that evening backstage not so much to scold you for being in the way, but out of a desperate, hopeful longing that you might offer some words of encouragement. I was not let down, and I have felt stronger ever since. I should never have suspected any such intention. We have never even spoken since then, until today, and then I forced it. She shook her head, a stray lock of her black hair coming loose. You must be a very young and inexperienced man to expect to understand everything a woman feels just from what she says or does. No, with a smile. I have moved beyond that stage of development, although the enigma of some feminine natures may always remain beyond me. But can I ask you a somewhat personal question as well? Certainly, but I reserve the right to decline a direct answer. Is Alyssa Ornish your real name or just your stage name? Why do you ask? That is a secret which I believe an actress is entitled to keep sacred. For one specific reason, because I cannot escape the vague impression that we have met before. She did not respond immediately, her gloved fingers noticeably tightening around the prayer book, her eyes carefully avoiding his. You are mistaken in that, for we have never met, she said slowly and emphatically. Furthermore, Alyssa Ornish is my stage name, but it is also part of my true name. Suddenly she paused and glanced at him. I have spoken very openly to you this morning, Mr. Carlton. Most people, I suppose, find me reserved and uncommunicative. Perhaps I come across that way depending on my mood. But I have been lonely, and somehow you have inspired my trust and unlocked my life. I believe you to be a trustworthy man, and because of that belief, I am now going to ask you to stop asking me any more. My past life has not been so great that I enjoy dwelling on it. I have chosen to completely forget about it and live solely for the future. They were standing in front of the door to the women's entrance of the hotel by now, and the young man respectfully lifted his hat. Your wish will definitely be respected, he said politely, but that doesn't necessarily mean that our friendship has to end here. Her face transformed with a sudden smile, and she impulsively reached out her hand. Certainly not, if you can handle my quirks. I've never easily made friends, so I'm even more surprised at how freely I've been with you. But that just makes it harder to let go of a friendship once it's formed. Are you planning to stay with the group? I have no choice, but you have the whole world. Yet my intense dedication to the art of acting keeps me captive. Their eyes met with smiles, and the next moment the door closed quietly between them. Carlton turned away and entered the dim hotel lobby, feeling mentally unsettled and undecided about his future actions. Miss Ornish had been openly intimate, pleasantly friendly, but despite all that, there was undoubtedly a certain restraint in both her words and actions that continued to confuse and tease him. She had something in her past to hide. She didn't even try to deceive him about it, but rather kept him at a distance with deliberate coolness. The way she had done this only fueled his eagerness to uncover the mystery of her reserve, and made him see her as completely different from other girls. She had become a puzzle, an enigma that he would attempt to solve, and her unique nature, perplexing, ever-changing, full of puzzling moods, only served to captivate his imagination and invite his daydreams. A strange excitement surged through him when he caught a quick glimpse of a white skirt and a well-shaped ankle as she swiftly ran up the steep stairs. However, almost instantly he snapped back to reality with a sudden jolt as Stork turned away from the window and sneeringly confronted him. Stork's blotchy face was unpleasantly contorted, with a half-smoked cigar perched between his lips. The two men's eyes met briefly, one filled with slight anger. "Seems like you've made quite an impression by the looks of it," the Maine man suggested with a knowing wink. "She's not that difficult to win over, is she, when the right man tries?" In an instant, a passionate blow was struck, chairs were overturned, and Stork, dazed and trembling, looked up from the floor at the stern and upright figure towering threateningly over him, fists clenched and shoulders squared. "If you dare utter another word like that, you wretch," Carlton warned sternly, "I will give you a good beating. Don't doubt for a second that I won't keep my promise." For a tense moment he stood there, glaring down at the cowering figure on the ground. Then, his face still filled with fury, he turned away with contempt. Stork, cursing under his breath like a coward, watched as Carlton ascended the stairs, but the younger man never even glanced back. Chapter 4. During the next two performances, there was a necessary change in actors due to Mr. Stork's slight illness. With the help of others giving him cues, Carlton managed to deliver his lines, aware of the teasing from the audience and sensing Miss Ornish's attempt to hide her amusement. This encounter didn't improve his mood, and he felt tempted to abandon the entire endeavor once again. Why should he persist in making a fool of himself after all? He was definitely old enough to be done with chasing after elusive dreams. And besides, there was his constant risk of running into some old acquaintance who would expose the whole damn story in the Denver social scene. The thought of the likely mockery from his friends made him cringe. Moreover, he felt ashamed of his actions. This actress meant nothing to him. He convinced himself of that important fact at least 20 times a day. She was a delightful companion, intelligent, witty, full of captivating charm, irresistibly charming for sure, yet it was clearly impossible for him to ever consider her in a more serious way. This became sufficiently clear to his logical thinking, yet at the same time he could never fully let go. She rarely appeared to him twice the same, proving to be as changeable as the winds, her very nature seeming to fluctuate with a suddenness that never allowed him to completely escape from her allure, but left him wondering how she would greet him next. Candid or distant, filled with unrestrained cheerfulness or dignified by feminine reserve, smiling or serious, the unpredictable whims of Miss Ornish were utterly beyond his guessing, while behind all these outward displays of tantalizing personality, there always lurked a depth of concealed womanhood which consistently baffled his attempts at understanding. It annoyed him to realize his own powerlessness, to comprehend how completely this girl diverted his most daring attempts at uncovering the true direction of her heart and life. She refused to be deciphered, wearing her various masks with a cool defiance that seemingly indicated complete indifference to his approval, while constantly offering him fleeting, tantalizing glimpses into partially revealed depths that made his heart beat with anticipation that was never fully realized. It never once occurred to him that such tricks might be aimed at her as much as him. He lacked the self-importance that could have convinced him that they simply indicated a hidden power struggle, a desperate attempt to suppress a desire to give in to the temptation of the moment. It was a battle for liberation fought silently behind a facade of smiles, an exchange of mundane conversation. Yet beneath this superficial interaction, she was fervently praying that he would leave of his own accord and set her free. The woman, far more than him, understood the complete impossibility of any serious relationship between them, and she fought off his advances with every weapon at her disposal, her very soul trembling behind her cheerful smile. It was a valiant effort, and yet those ineffective defensive measures only served to increase his interest, to awaken his passion, and thus bind him more tightly to her. Once again safe from prying eyes, he returned to the anonymity of the backstage area and to the routine handling of props and scenery, feeling completely unable to let her completely leave his life. In her own room, she dampened her pillow with tears of regret and remorse, yet eventually she fell asleep strangely content because he lingered. It was the way of a woman. It was no less the way of a man. In this manner, the heart-of-the-world actors arrived to fulfill their commitment in San Juan on a Saturday night. This was the most vibrant camp in that entire mountain region, a frenzied, bustling city of tents and shacks, sprawling wooden commercial buildings, and a few unattractive brick structures perched above the golden rocks of the Vila Valley, bordered on one side by towering cliffs and on the other by the unforgiving desert. In those times, San Juan made no distinction between midnight and noon. All was shimmer, radiance, vitality, excitement along the streets. The gloomy, looming mountains were pouring unimaginable wealth into her lap, while immorality and wrongdoing, ostentation and lawlessness held a grand celebration along the crowded, sprawling alleys. The jubilant residents lived today with complete disregard for the future, their one prevailing thought being money, their sole acknowledged purpose being the earthly pleasures that could be acquired with it. Everything was primitive, the primal instincts still in full control, the drinking, laughing, brawling creatures, consumed by passion and a lust for blood, worshipping physical strength, and governed by the ideals of a frontier society where the true law hung loosely at the side. Bars, casinos, dance clubs, and brothels shamelessly displayed themselves on every corner. The streets were a constant riot, while all higher forms of life seemed inactive due to an insatiable pursuit of wealth and reckless squandering of it on indulgence and vice. Above it all, as if written across the clear sky, the ever-present motto of carefree humanity appeared: "Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die." Just a week prior, a short railroad spur had been built up the narrow, rock-guarded valley from Timmins Junction, 18 miles to the north, and over those uneven tracks, the troop of daring wanderers known as the Heart of the World arrived in San Juan, finding accommodations in the dilapidated wooden structure locally known as the Occidental Hotel. The San Juan Opera House, more commonly referred to as the Gaiety, was truly just an extension of the Poodle Dog Saloon, with side doors from the main floor leading directly into the inviting bar, while those in the gallery provided an equally effortless entrance into the spacious gambling rooms directly above. It was an incredibly unattractive building, hastily constructed entirely of wood. The stage was used day and night for continuous variety shows of the kind that naturally appealed to the diverse audience. However, these interruptions were occasionally set aside to make way for a daring traveling group to appear in the legitimate theater. But at the end of each night's show, the main floor was swiftly cleared, the rows of seats hastily pushed back from the center, and the resulting empty space used for a general dance that always continued until dawn. When the drop curtain slowly rose on that Saturday evening, a crowd of fully 3,000 people packed the hall, eager for any new excitement and ready to either taunt or applaud a performer as their whims dictated. Bearded miners, easily noticeable in their red shirts, cattle ranchers sporting wide-brimmed hats and hairy leggings, swarthy Mexicans leisurely puffing on their ever-present cigarettes, gamblers dressed in pristine clothing, and numerous women with garish makeup and attire made up the frontier audience, full of potential. The outcome could easily swing towards either good or evil, depending on the prevailing mood. Fortunately, Heart of the World quickly captivated the men's interest, with laughter resounding in appreciation of Mr. Sprague's enthusiastic buffoonery, while the diverse crowd sat in surprised silence, showing respect as Miss Ornish conveyed the lesson of a woman's sorrow and her struggle against temptation. It was truly worth gazing out over the electric footlights at those tough-faced, bearded men and those flamboyantly dressed women, all held captive and controlled by the emotions played out before them. The vast audience was so hushed that the sound of the spinning wheel and the clattering of ivory chips in the adjacent rooms could be plainly heard. This atmosphere provided inspiration, and never before had Alyssa Ornish displayed her inherent power and her genuine spark of genius more clearly. Carlton had little to attend to in his role that night, both on and off the stage, as the company planned to spend Sunday in town. As a result, he was only slightly behind the other members of the troupe when they reached the hotel after the evening's performance. Indeed, he was earlier than many, for most of the male members had promptly gone to the convenient bar with whatever small amounts of money they could squeeze out of Clinton's reluctant hand. Carlton happened to pause for a moment at the cigar counter to exchange a pleasant good-night word with the seemingly friendly clerk. "Are you one of the actors?" asked the clerk, showing some slight interest. The young man nodded casually, not feeling excessively proud of the distinction. "Sorry I couldn't have been there," the clerk continued warmly. "The guys tell me you gave them a really great show, but I'm here to bet that some of your people wish they had stayed away from San Juan." "How's that?" "Well, that chubby guy, what's his name?" "Oh, yes. Clinton, the sheriff, was in here looking for him with some papers he had to deliver. And it would have made you laugh to see that guy hurry out when I met him over there on the street a few minutes ago and gave him a drink. Guest of the hotel, you know, and we didn't want him caught here. Besides, we knew he had the money for the rest of your group, and we naturally wanted our share. The sheriff is out trying to find him now, but Lord, the guy is definitely out of the county by now if he followed my advice. There was an extra train going to Timmins tonight, and he just had enough time to catch it." The dramatic situation slowly became clear to Carlton while the clerk was talking. "Are you telling me Clinton has actually left?" he asked anxiously. "Did he leave any money?" "Sure, he paid your family's expenses until Monday. You can bet I made sure of that." "Expenses until Monday?" Carlton completely forgot himself. "That's not a salary, man. There is something incredibly dishonest about this whole situation. Why, he made over $3,000 tonight, and he has all of that, and at least a week's earnings besides that infernal dog. Was he alone? Tall guy with a trimmed black mustache and a bald head. Sprague. I expected that. They're similar. When can they leave the junction? Well, the first train scheduled goes east at 4 o'clock, but it's usually late." Carlton walked back and forth across the floor, swearing and thinking alternately. "Is there any way I could get there before that time?" he asked finally, his strong jaw firmly set. "Well, I reckon you might by riding a horse across the old trail, but you'd need a guide in the dark, and it would be a tough ride." The young engineer stood for a moment looking out of the window into the night. The street was well lit by the many bar lights, and he could see scattered snowflakes in the air, blown around by the windy gusts. He no longer had any doubt about Clinton's desertion, and a wave of anger washed over him. He didn't care much about the small amount of money owed for his services, but it was a dirty, despicable trick, and he resented being so easily taken advantage of. Suddenly he wondered how this unexpected event might affect the others. With only one of them in mind, he strode back to the counter, his teeth clenched fiercely. "What is the number of Miss Ornish's room?" 54, first door to the right of the stairs." He ran up the steep stairs, caught a glimpse of dim light shining through the closed window above the door, and knocked sharply. There was a hurried movement inside, and her voice spoke. "What is it?" "I am Mr. Carlton, and I need to talk to you right now." His tone was low and serious enough to make her immediately realize that there was a serious emergency. Without hesitation, the door was held open, and she stood before him in the dim light of the single lamp, wearing a soft white robe, her dark hair slightly disheveled, her eyes searching for his in confusion. "What's wrong?" "Did you know that both Clinton and Sprague have disappeared?" "No, I didn't." Her cheeks suddenly turning pale, her fingers gripping the edge of the door. "Are you saying they left us here to fend for ourselves?" He nodded. "Yes, that's pretty much it. What I wanted to ask was, does that guy owe you any money?" She hesitated for a moment, still wary of his true intentions, her lips parting, her face still clearly showing the shock of the revelation. "Why does that matter now? Why do you need to know?" "Because I suspect you've been left with nothing. Clinton hasn't mentioned anything about payment to me since I joined the company, and when I found out he intentionally left us stranded here, my first concern was your unfortunate situation if my suspicions were true." "If they are, what can you do?" "The hotel clerk says it's possible to reach the junction on horseback before any trains depart from there on the main line. I intend to make him give us what we're owed, but I need to know the exact circumstances first. Do you have any money?" She stood there gazing at him, her anger and shame forgotten in the magnetic presence of Carlton's determined expression. For the first time she truly understood the commanding influence of this man, and it completely overwhelmed her. She no longer doubted his intentions in the slightest, and her feminine heart swelled in response to his masculine strength. I don't have $1, she confessed simply, her eyelashes falling over her downcast eyes. What does that guy owe you? $260. He has only managed to pay me a small portion of what I actually had to ask for. For a moment he stood there, breathing heavily. She dared to glance up, seeking answers, only to meet his stern gaze and quickly look away. Okay, Miss Ornish, he finally said, the words bursting out forcefully. I now understand the situation, and you will stay here until I return. I'll get your money, don't worry, even if I have to track him all the way to Denver. But I'll make sure to collect what this miserable thief owes me from him. In the next moment, he hurriedly went downstairs to the office, getting ready for action. Leaning over the railing, Miss Ornish listened to his rapid and anxious instructions with a strange sense of pride that left her cheeks flushed.